You're listening to a download from the outdoorstation.co.uk. Number 551.
Hello and welcome back to the Outdoors Station for the first part of a two-part podcast, and also over on YouTube you'll be watching possibly a one-parter. I haven't quite decided yet how I will edit it, with Anna Richards, who's a freelance writer based over in Lyon, France. She completed this year most of the TCT. That's not the PCT, the AT or the CDT, but the TCT, the Transcaucasian Trail, a 1,500 kilometre, that's 900 miles for the imperial people, trail that takes in Azerbaijan, Armenia and Georgia, based over on the edge of Asia. This is a brand new trail which is currently opening up, and they are seeking adventurous hikers to undertake the trail and see what that part of the world offers. It's a fascinating conversation with Anna. She's completely open and honest about all aspects of her experience and her adventure, and it is a joy to listen to her enthusiasm about the experience that she had on the TCT. So without further ado, here's the podcast, and here's the video and my conversation with Anna Richards. Well, Anna, thank you very much indeed for joining us on this podcast. I'm very, very excited to have this conversation with you. I've done the introduction, explaining to people who you are and where you are, but please do, for everybody who's listening, explain how you became a writer and you're located in France.
Well, thank you very much for having me on your podcast as well, Bob. So I moved to France in September of last year. I was already writing part-time alongside my salary job for a travel company. There wasn't a huge market in selling trips to India during the pandemic. So that kind of gave me a platform to expand on what I was writing. And I found that I was getting more and more work travel writing. And I thought, well, perhaps I could do this full time. And then a series of sort of personal circumstances led to me just making very dramatic changes in my life. I essentially lost my father, and I had a bit of a life crisis, and I thought, I'll run away to France and be a writer and sort of run away from all of my problems. And incredibly, it's actually worked very well. So now I live in Lyon, and I'm a travel and outdoor writer full time. So yeah, it was a pretty good decision.
Well, that's fantastic. And you're obviously enjoying life as a digital nomad. It's working out for you on all levels?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I think that, there's been a lot of learning curves as well, because, when you kind of plunge into the world of freelance writing, there's not a lot of sort of resources out there, bar, trying to sign up for a course that charges you ridiculous amounts of money to explain how to make a living as a freelance writer. So I've kind of figured things out for myself through kind of a series of trial and error. But yeah, it's worked very, very well. I mean, I work from a co-working space because being a digital nomad is great. I love the freedom to work from anywhere, but I don't like to be on my own, which is strange for somebody who disappears into the wild for weeks at a time on on really isolated hikes. But I don't like to work on my own. So yeah, I'm on a co-working each day.
And are the French treating you well?
They are being incredibly welcoming. Yeah, I pester them. I steal lots of their ideas, every time we're at lunch together, somebody starts a conversation about something, I think, well, that could be interesting, and all of a sudden the notebook comes out and I'm interviewing them at lunch. But no, they've been incredibly welcoming. I've been very, very lucky to make a very good group of friends here, and I think that I will be here for a very long time.
Oh, fantastic! Well, that's good to hear. Now, you have your childhood was obviously in Cornwall, and you've done a fair amount of travelling. Have you done many long distance hiking trails per se before you sort of went on to this epic event we're about to talk about?
Yes, I have, and I'm very glad that I had as well, because I think that if I'd set off on the Transcaucasian Trail as my first long distance hike, well, I don't think that I would have got nearly as far as I did. My pretty much my entire adult life has been working in travel or in some shape or form, and I'm also a bit of a queen of the gap year. When I studied languages at university, and I had a year abroad as part of that. And that was when I really started long distance hiking. I had a stint of 8 months in South America when I was living and working in Argentina. And Argentina is it's a hiker's playground. So I began long distance hiking whilst I was out there. Finished university, and all I wanted to do was go off traveling again. So I worked in a bar just long enough to save enough money so that I could go off this time to India for a very long chunk of time. And that led to my job working for a travel company specializing in India for the next 5 years. And whenever I could afford to take a long chunk of time off, and the company were very flexible about me taking sabbaticals as well, which was an absolute blessing. I would go off on a long trip, and it would usually involve a long hike. And definitely part of my decision to move to Lyon was linked into that you've got all this spectacular mountain scenery on your doorstep as well. I mean, the Alps, the start of the Alps is an hour's drive from my house. So I can really wake up in the morning, see that the weather's nice, and, decide to go for a day stomp or even multiple days.
That's brilliant. And have you made many sort of hiking friends, or is there a separate community from sort of hiking and traveling? Because they are two slightly different communities, aren't they?
Definitely different communities, but yeah, no, really, really lovely groups. I mean, one of the ones that I did that I'm a particularly good group on was just over a year ago, hiking the GR20 across Corsica, which is a 2-week trail that crosses the vast majority of the island. And I set off completely alone. And to be honest, most days I walked alone because I like to walk alone, but I love to come together with people, at camp or when you're taking a break. But by the end of the first day, I'd already met a great bunch of people, some of whom I still see very regularly. And after the hike, we had about 9 of us cruising around in Airbnbs around Corsica that had all come together through a shared fantastic experience.
Well, I know the GR20 isn't for beginners, certainly. So you've laid out your credentials quite nicely there. So thanks very much for that. Now, this particular trek is well, it's very new, isn't it? It's coming to sort of fruition at the moment. I've been obviously doing some research prior to speaking to you, and recognise that they've been working on it for several years, but they're really getting to the point of sort of releasing it now as a long distance trek, and nicely abbreviated to TCT, which I think that's fantastic. It equates quite nicely to the PCT and the AT and the CDT. So would you like to introduce the gist of this trek, the name, where it is? And while you're doing so, I'll zoom into the map and we'll have a look at it in detail.
Sure. So yeah, the Transcaucasian Trail, or TCT, it's a long distance hiking trail that when it's completely finished, it is going to go across Armenia, Georgia, and there's also going to be a branch in Azerbaijan, which is going to join on to the Georgian section. So the Armenia and Georgia leg, which is, I suppose, nearly complete, is about 1,500 kilometers long. Once the Azerbaijan leg with a kind of additional part in Georgia is tacked on as well, the whole thing is going to be about 3,000 kilometers, but it's not sort of one straight line. It's kind of 2 prongs that come together in Georgia. And the Armenian section, which is the section that I was tackling, is 827 kilometers in total, of which I did 580 kilometers.
Now, the website associated with it is actually extremely comprehensive, isn't it? They've done a cracking job on the website for people that are perhaps looking at this for the first time.
Yeah, it was incredibly, in some ways it's incredibly well organized. And it's funny because for the TCT, I mean, I've never ever prepared so thoroughly for a hike. I mean, usually you don't do very much preparation for a hike other than, you make sure that you've got sort of a GPX of the route downloaded, you've probably got a physical map, you plan, the meals that you're going to take for it. But with the TCT, I was doing huge amounts of preparation, and we effectively, the hikers doing it this year were kind of, I suppose, the guinea pigs for the trail. So it was people that have, hiked a lot in various corners of the world. And we had monthly training sessions via video call, where the organisers of the trail, who've been working on this trail for about 7 years, would share their tips, where we'd get to ask questions. We'd even get training sessions on different mapping applications as well. So they were incredibly thorough in trying to prepare us for the Sea Challenge.
Well, it's certainly an area, just below Russia and above Iran there, Iraq, an area I think that most UK, Europeans and obviously Americans would be very unfamiliar with. And if I was to go heading out there, I think I'd be quite apprehensive about the whole language thing, and understanding that they don't have the same, as I would guess anyway, the same sort of support network as you would do here or in Europe, obviously, if you were to get into trouble. So it's a really raw, or it looks to me anyway, a really raw sort of long distance hike, and presumably going through some very rural, remote areas, as well as obviously the flesh pots. And the map once again is very good, the way that it lays out the where are we? Let's just go to that. It lays out all the stopping points you could get to, bed and breakfasts, guest houses and campsites, as well as presumably allowing you to wild camp as you go.
Yeah. It's incredibly rural and remote in some places. The language was a huge challenge as well. I actually, in Lyon, which has quite a big Armenian diaspora, I actually spent a couple of months doing Armenian conversation classes in preparation for going, because I'm not used to going somewhere where I don't speak the language at all, being a languages graduate, and I was quite apprehensive about going all alone and being completely unable to communicate. So I had a very, very patient Armenian teacher who kind of equipped me with the basics, and also equipped me just with a lot of vocabulary. A lot of it was, sort of food and things like that. So I was not really able to hold a conversation in Armenian, but I could make some of the basics understood by throwing out sort of the odd word that she taught me. But in terms of the route, there were large periods of time, often days on end, where you don't pass any civilization at all. The first 3 days of the hike, I didn't see a single human, not a villager, not a beekeeper, nobody. And that was incredibly strange, because I realized that hasn't happened to me before, to sort of go 3 days without seeing another human face entirely.
Yeah, I mean, I've done 24 hours and that felt strange. So several days must take some getting used to. Okay, so let's just backtrack slightly. You were sitting in your shared office in Lyon. How did you actually hear about this in the first place? And is the same offer to people available to hikers now?
So I saw a tweet. I use Twitter quite a lot to find work, because editors will often put what they're looking for on their Twitter page. And I saw a tweet about a brand new long distance trail, and that they were looking for experienced hikers to test it out. And they had an application form where you fill in a few details about yourself, and they would contact you if they were interested and if they thought you sort of matched the profile. To be honest, I didn't expect them to get back in touch with me. First of all, because I didn't have 3 months to spare to try and take on the entire Armenia, Georgia leg, because I'm at the age where all of my friends are getting married, so your summer's kind of dictated by planning it around various wedding dates. And also, I mean, maybe this is a little bit of imposter syndrome because I have done a lot of long distance hiking in different places in the world, but I also assumed that, there would be people who are vastly more experienced than me. I don't know, Levis in the Wood, Bear Grylls-esque, who would be sort of applying, and that my application would be of interest. So I saw it and my interest was piqued, and I love a challenge, and I just quickly filled out the application, signed up, and I think I was actually quite late in seeing this application. And when I was on my first video call, there were people that had signed up for it sort of a year or so before. They'd known about it a long time before. But between filling out the application and being accepted and being in my first training session, it was about 24 hours in total. So I kind of filled out this application a bit on a whim, sort of thinking, oh, well, they probably won't select me anyway, and I've only got just over a month to give. Time-wise, and Megan, one of the organisers, got back to me pretty much within a few hours and was just like, yes, we'd love to have you on board. And then, by the next day I was in my first training session. It was all incredibly exciting. They were talking about it so animatedly. They were showing photos. I think I got off the first training session and cried because I was so excited. My housemate was like, get a grip. You're going off on your own for a month now, so you better stop crying about it. But it was excited tears.
Well, I have to say, I mean, just looking at this, since I've heard about it the last few days, seeing your name, I've got excited for you. I think this is absolutely fantastic. I'd love to have done it, but there you go, one of those things. So just briefly then, how many people sort of were accepted for this particular first year?
So from talking to one of the organisers, a man named Tom Allen, he said that I think it was just shy of 100 people attempted at least a section of it this year. Because the route at the moment is 1,500 kilometres, and the hiking season runs from, late May, early June through to sort of at the end of September. That means that you're quite likely not to cross anybody. I bumped into 3 other people who were attempting part of the Transcaucasian Trail. I bumped into all 3 of them on one day, and they were all going the opposite direction to me. So a lot of the time, it definitely felt as though you were the only person tackling the trail.
And how did you feel then? What was the time scale between you actually applying and leaving?
I applied in, I think it was February, and I flew to Armenia end of July, started hiking early August. So I did have time to prepare to take my Armenian classes, attend the virtual training sessions.
But if you're anything like me, you probably went mad on Google trying to find as much out as possible about the countries and the characteristics of the people and also details of how to get there and get away, I guess. Yeah.
So, obsessively sort of reading any guidebooks that I could. There's not a lot on Armenia, but actually one of the few very comprehensive guidebooks that has been written about Armenia has been written by one of the trail planners, Tom Allen. So that's good because it already has quite a focus on hiking. In terms of physical maps of Armenia, because I usually like to have a physical map, not just rely on technology, pretty much non-existent. It's not possible to get a physical, comprehensive hiking map of Armenia. So I found that quite unsettling.
And so obviously you set off, you got on the plane. How did you feel when you arrived? What I mean, compared to your other experiences, obviously in South America and so on, there's a different sort of feeling, I'm sure, of anticipation.
Yeah, and I mean, I was definitely quite apprehensive. I knew that it was going to be tough. I think that I was probably less worried about the physical challenges of the trail, and I was more worried about sort of the mental challenges and the other challenges that hiking a brand new trail poses. I don't think I really had prepared myself for how tough I would find certain aspects of it. I think, you can think, okay, well, of course it's going to be tough. People haven't really done this trail before. I'm going to be on my own for a huge amount of time. There's going to be, I'm going to have to sort of do a lot of off-trail navigation. There's going to be bushwhacking. There's going to be, the language barrier and wildlife and dangerous plants that I haven't encountered before. But you can think that, and then actually putting it into practice, it really does push you. So it was very, very tough at times.
I'm just trying to find where you started from, Megri, and see if we can just put the little Google man down to see what the village or town is like. And seeing if he's coming in now, so let's have a look at this. So this is where he's landed, in the middle of town.
Yeah,
it looks almost French, actually.
Well. It doesn't look at all French when you're there. So Megri, it's right on it's essentially the last town before you cross over into Iran. And it's incredibly arid there, and that's the main square that marks the starting points for northbound hikers hiking the TCT. But no, it didn't look at all French when I was there, I have to say.
Did you have any difficulties literally getting from the airport to your accommodation the first night and sorting yourself out and sort of getting yourself ready mentally and sort of tuning in, as I like to say, into the country?
Yes. Yeah. And I think maybe this is kind of the apprehension that kind of comes in traveling a little bit post-COVID as well, because I've always traveled so widely, and I have been to places where I've had a complete language barrier before, although not to go off into the wilds and, hike a trail for several weeks all on my own where I've had such a language barrier. But it had been quite a long time where, since I'd been somewhere out of Europe, and Armenia was very, very different for me. I spent a few days in Yerevan at the start. I was working on an article there, and I also needed to do things like buy camping gas. I sent on resupply packages. So one thing that's really, really good on the TCT, they've organized places that you can send resupply packages to. Which is very helpful. So I spent sort of a couple of days getting my bearings and doing that. And then actually getting to the trail start in Megri was quite challenging because it's tiny little local buses that you take. You can only book onto them by calling the bus company, which with my very rudimentary level of Armenian was just going to get me nowhere. So I found somebody to help me with that. And the bus itself takes 9 hours. And it's a very rickety little bus. Part of the roof actually fell off on the way down to Megri. So I was actually pretty happy to get off the bus and, to get walking. But that journey down to Megri took an entire day. So I didn't set off hiking until the day after the journey. Okay.
So that looks like then it was... you definitely knew you were on an adventure. When the bus comes off, the roof comes off a bus. I remember getting onto a bus a long time ago that had bullet holes in the side of it. I knew I was on an adventure.
Yeah. Where was that?
Anyway, that was in darkest Thailand, out in the mountains. Anyway, let's actually get into some pictures that you've taken. What I think I'll probably do is I'll just randomly run through some pictures as you explain what it was like, the sort of getting your feet wet, as it were, as you first started hiking, getting used to the terrain perhaps, but also the local farmers, how it was with wild camping if you were on your own for 3 days, how that managed, how you felt. Did you feel nervous by doing it? Did you feel, obviously I'm going to ask you a safety question at some stage, but I don't want to harbour on it too much, but more really about sort of how comfortable you felt, if that's okay.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I'd like to talk about how comfortable I felt and the safety aspect of it as well, because I think that it's important as a woman hiking alone, that it is something that I talk quite openly and honestly about as well. But to start off with, sort of how I found the trail and first impressions and how I felt. I think it took me longer than usual on this trail to to really start feeling comfortable and to feel as though I was in my rhythm. The first few days of the trail were some of the toughest days of hiking that I have ever done in my life, because the temperatures were incredibly high. And in our training sessions, we'd been warned that you could quite possibly go for 3 days without finding a water source. And when the temperatures are sort of mid-30s to pushing 40 degrees, even if you get up and you walk at, sort of strange times of night, which, I was getting up very early to hike when I was in this first part of the trail, which is a national park called Armenia National Park. You drink a lot, you get through a lot of water. So on the first day of the trail, I set off with 11 litres of water strapped to my back. And I'm 5'2". My backpack was so heavy that I was having to sort of do this kind of maneuver where I swung it onto my back. And I was going very steeply uphill, and it was exhausting. I think I racked up on the first days, but it was, my watch told me I'd done something like 800 intensity minutes. So I was absolutely beat by the end of the first day. And I didn't need all 11 litres of water, but I did get through 7 litres of water before I found a water source. So, I hadn't overgated as much as all that, really. It was incredibly arid for a lot of the hike. I think that was my first impression, going in August as well, which is very, very dry. That photo there, that's Armenia National Park right at the beginning. And it is this kind of very toothy, arid mountains. And when you get up high, that's all you can see. You can't see any form of civilization. You can just see very craggy, toothy, dry mountains in all directions. And I'm a small person anyway, but I felt really incredibly small and isolated. I think what really helped me for the first few days of the trek, when I left Megri, I was followed by 4 street dogs. I think they were a family. There were 2 small ones and 2 that kind of looked like parents. And to start off with, I didn't really want to be followed by these very scruffy looking dogs that were sniffing at my pack the whole time. But they actually stayed with me for 4 days until I was back in sort of semi-civilization. They got chased off by a sheepdog. And I was really glad to have them with me. And, I was having sort of full conversations with these dogs. They would sleep outside my tent. So when I woke up in the morning, completely in the middle of nowhere, I'd hear, kind of a dog sort of scratching its leg. And, I'd wake up and I'd have a little chat to the dogs that camped outside. They did steal my cheese at one point, which is one point where we did fall out a little bit. But other than that, I was really happy to have them with me. And I think in terms of kind of what I usually find on a long distance hike is that you get huge kind of ecstatic highs. And that's what I really love about long distance hiking and going out into the wild on your own is, you get this real buzz, and you get these moments where you think, well, this is absolutely wonderful. This is fantastic. I'm on top of the world. It took longer for those highs to come. And I think that was purely because my brain was in overdrive with, having to bushwhack, having to navigate, sheer physical exhaustion. So they didn't come straight away, but when they came, they were epic.
Well, strangely, I was looking through the website, obviously the TCT website, and actually one of the warnings it was saying is beware of wild dogs. So I'm glad you made friends with them, because that looked to me as you've got to be careful. There are a few places I know around the world where the wild dogs will hunt you.
Yeah, and the sheepdogs are definitely one of the big kind of dangers of the TCT, because they will come towards you barking wildly. Everyone has a different kind of strategy of how to cope with them. There was one woman that I spoke to who said that she sort of windmilled her walking poles like this to keep them away from her. I would sort of shout "nesty," which is sit, and hope that helped. And make a lot of noise so that the shepherds would come. Somebody even suggested sitting down to let them kind of surround you, because there's often several at once. I was not going to sit on the ground and put my face at eye level with these, huge snapping dogs personally. Like, that didn't sound sensible to me. But I think that a lot of the time the bark is worse than their bite, and the shepherds are usually pretty good at coming quite quickly to help you out as well. But actually, my wild dogs that were following me, they were a good deterrent, because the big sheepdogs were more interested in my new pets than in me.
Okay. So I have to ask then, obviously, usually it's always when it's the first time. Here you are several days into your hike. What was it like when you came across your first shepherd or rural person? And how did the interaction go? Were they completely surprised to see a lone female doing this hike? Or was it like, oh yeah, we've had lots of people do this over time, and they were more casual about it?
Oh no, everyone was very, very surprised to see me. It's like watching a dog walk on its hind legs, I think, seeing me trotting through these remote places on my own. The first person that I came across, to be honest, I think the first person that I came across wasn't particularly interested in me at all. It was a beekeeper in the middle of nowhere, and I was sort of staring at them, kind of blinking like, wow, that's a human face. I haven't seen one of those for 3 days. And I think they just sort of wanted to get on with whatever they were doing. But largely going through villages, I mean, people were surprised to see me on my own, and that surprise kind of manifested itself in very different ways. And sometimes it manifested itself in, this real like heartwarming hospitality, where I would be invited to stay, I'd be brought in for dinner, for coffee. I'd leave with, the contents of an entire fruit orchard bursting out of my backpack, and think, well, how can I carry all of this? But it could also manifest itself in some situations that left me feeling quite uncomfortable or unsafe as well, because a woman traveling alone, I think, anywhere in the world is vulnerable, but in Armenia, it's a very, very uncommon sight. And, it could lead people to try to push their luck as well.
Yeah, I mean, I've spoken to a few solo female travellers over the years, and it seems to fall into several categories. There's the white knight syndrome, where somebody gets overprotective and over-concerned for you, and that in itself can cross over into being creepy. Then you obviously have the negative side, the people that are sort of looking for no good, as it were. But they generally, my experience and people I've spoken to, tend to be on the smaller percentage, certainly. And it's more a case of people being over-hospitable. But did you find, I mean, they're quite a conservative country, aren't they? I mean, I don't know, what's the religion? Is the religion Catholic there? Or is it Russian Orthodox?
It's a Christian country. It's the oldest Christian country in the world, I believe, which is why you see all sort of the monasteries dotted around. I want to say it's kind of Orthodox branch of Christianity, but I'm not entirely sure. I just know that it's Christian.
So, but I mean, generally their attitude to women is quite conservative. A woman's place is in the home type of thing.
Yeah, definitely. And the white knight syndrome that you spoke about, that was definitely a factor. And I remember one occasion where, a very well-meaning man tried to pretty much forcibly rip my backpack off my back. And he was like, you can't carry that. The next town is 10 kilometers away. And I was like, no, I assure you I really can. I've done about 500 of these by now. And he was sort of staggering under the weight of my backpack, because obviously, he hadn't spent weeks doing that. So, I mean, that was sort of a minor annoyance. I think, on the flip side, as a woman, you do get to access places that a man walking alone wouldn't necessarily. So when I was invited in by families to stay at their home, to, have a meal with them, although I had sort of, go through all kind of the rigmarole of, oh no, you can't walk that way, you can't go alone, you'll be in so much danger, you'll get eaten by a bear. I had to sort of go through all of that, but it did also allow me to access places that a lone man wouldn't be able to access. But that being said, I don't want to gloss over the safety aspect of it either, because I did have some experiences with men where I felt incredibly unsafe. And I remember reading the Cheryl Strayed's book Wild, where she talks about, all the kind of the wild animals that she's encountered walking the PCT, and how actually the time she feels most threatened is when she encounters, I believe it's 2 men in the wild. And for me, certainly the time that I felt most threatened was when I accepted a kind offer, what I thought was a kind offer from somebody who had a bee farm in the middle of nowhere, who said, look, there's a lot of bears in this area, which was true. I'd seen a lot of bear prints and bear poo. You can camp at my farm. There's fences and everything, and that way you'll be safer. But he did try to force himself on me. And fortunately, he was quite sort of a small, slight, skinny person. And, physically, I wasn't kind of overpowered. But, that happened in the wild, and it's an incredibly uncomfortable situation, and you realise that you're incredibly remote. And after that, I took my chances with the bears, and I was very glad I did. But yeah, I mean, there's the two sides of the coin, being a woman on your own in the wild.
Well, wasn't that a fascinating conversation? Thanks very much indeed to my guest Anna for taking the time to explain so eloquently and enthusiastically the information on the TCT. If you want the links, of course, they all can be found over on the outdoorstation.co.uk website, and you'll see there links to Anna, her work, the pictures from the event, and also a link to the video if you're listening to this on the audio. My thanks to everyone for their support and comments over the last few months in getting me back up to speed in getting these podcasts out. And please, when you do have a look at the website, do leave a comment, and any feedback you can when you see this popping up on social media. It's greatly appreciated. And of course, if you're able to, a review on iTunes would get me back up to speed and back up into the top 10 as well, which would be greatly appreciated. So I hope you enjoyed that, folks. And for podcast listeners, part 2 is coming very soon. Until next time, take care out there, and bye for now.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. To hear or see more from our extensive free library, please visit theoutdoorstation.co.uk.